Hi to everyone, and welcome to the Cell Biology Unit. My name is Raffaele, team leader of Biology Group, and during this course, we will learn some basic concepts about biology. In particular, during this unit, we are going to focus our attention on the cell biology. Biology, in general, is a branch of science that deals with living organisms and their vital processes. Biology, in fact, encompasses different fields, including botany, ecology, evolution, microbiology, physiology, and zoology. In particular, during this unit, we are going to focus our attention on the cell biology. The unit is divided in two different parts. In part one, in the first part, we are going to learn why studied biology, why biology is important. In the second part of the presentation, we are going to focus our attention on physiological properties and structure of the cells. We will see the difference, for example, between prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell. And in the last part, we are going to focus our attention on the organelles. In the other part 2, we will have a look about the interaction and movement in and out of cells. So, let's begin. Actually, the term biology derives from the ancient Greek. Bios means life, and logos means study of life. Biology, as I told you before, is the scientific study of the vital phenomena of all living organisms. In the next slide, we can have a look at what does living organism means. Biology actually can be defined as a branch of science that studies living organisms and their vital process. And as we see here, so biology includes also concepts like evolution, genetics, anatomy, and as well as vegetal cell, animal cell, as well as also, of course, biomolecules. Biology is often in fact a project on the basis of levels that deal with fundamental units of life, and we will see that the fundamental unit of life is the cell. And again, as I told you also before, it encompasses different fields including botany, conservation, ecology, genetics, marine biology, but also medicine, microbiology, physiology, and zoology. Why we want to study biology and why biology is so important. Before starting, is maybe very worthy to give you a definition of living organism. So what a living organism is. By definition, any living organism is an organism made up of cells that present the fundamental properties typical of life. Which are these properties? The ability to reproduce, to react, to grow, be careful not only in volume but also differentiating. We will see later what does it mean differentiating for cell, to change and to perpetuate one's own variation and even to die. What can we see here? We can see, for example, a quote, a definition from Wilson, who say that the key of every biological problem must finally be thought in the cell, for every living organism is, or at the same time has been, a cell. So what does it mean? I think that is very important because via this definition, via this citation, we can easily realize why cells are so important. And here we can see how the cells look like. For example, this one is a cell connected to the other one, another cell connected to another one. So just I will give you another input, another definition that more cell can form an organism. Which kind of organism? We can have a look at later. Basically, all the living organisms are divided in 5 different kingdoms. They are animal, plant, fungi, protist, and moraine. In addition, you can have more information about the graph and about the division of 5 different kingdoms just following the link where you can find a more detailed classification. Generally, we know that millions of living organisms inhabit our planet. So, did you know they are divided in 5 separate kingdoms? Some, like for example animal and plant, are visible to naked eye, like for example a plant, gymnosperm, angiosperm, so big plant, or for example, big animal. However, there are also other living organisms, why living organisms? Because they are composed of cells, like for example, viruses or bacteria, that can only be seen under a microscope. So we need a particular tool, we need a particular instrumentation to see bacteria or viruses. Let's now have a look at the characteristic of 5 kingdoms of living organisms. Be careful, all these characteristics can be found in all living organisms. All the species, in fact, have similar characteristics in terms of the way they function and grow. What can we easily detect? We can detect, for example, one characteristic that is very important, that is nutrition. Nutrition can be divided in autotrophic organism, like for example makes its own food, or heterotrophics, feed on other living cell. A classical example, for example, for autotrophic living organisms are the plants, because via the photosynthesis they are able to make its own food. Or for example, another example of heterotrophic are the human being, for example, or the animal itself. We cannot provide by ourselves our food, but we need, for example, to eat. Another characteristic is also the cellular organization, or as I told you before, this cellular differentiation. The cellular organization basically can be divided in unicellular, means that organisms that having only one cell, and be careful, in this unicellular organism there is no differentiation, or multicellular. Multicellular are organisms like, for example, animal, like for example, plant as well, or fungi, where there are more cellular, having 2, more, or even million of cells. These million of cells are generally differentiated, means that there is a task division between each kind of cell. And of course, the cell type, as we will see later, generally cells can be divided in 2 broad categories. There we have the eukaryotic cell, where the genetic material is surrounded by membrane, or a prokaryotic cell, where there is no membrane, so there is lacking of membrane. And here again, we can see the same graph where we can appreciate the presence of fungi, plants, animal, protists, and archaeobacteria. However, there are also other characteristics of live human living cell. As I told you before, all these characteristics are essential for living organisms, but however, we can have basically a big difference, a huge difference between living organism and non-living organism. So living organisms are all the organisms composed of cells, like for example, protists, plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and the non-living organisms are everything that is surrounded, but without cell, like for example water, soil, air, mineral, and light. Be careful, this is a very important difference, because the presence or not of cell can divide the organism in living or non-living organisms. Other characteristics that we can find in kingdoms of living organisms are, for example, also the respiration, which can be divided in aerobics. Aerobics mean when we need oxygen, or anaerobics means that we do not use oxygen. For example, the human living cell are basically aerobic cells, because we know that we need oxygen in order to survive. And also the reproduction, which can be sexual, asexual, or through spores. In case of human being, for example, or animal, we talk about sexual reproduction. In case of, for example, there are some kind of plants which they use the asexual type of reproduction, or in case of some bacteria or some fungi, they use also spores. And also, for course, the movement. There are self-moving or statics depending of the cells. Before starting with the difference between eukaryotic cell, prokaryotic cell, and before going into much detail, let's have a look at the cell theory. Generally, a person contains about 100 trillion cells organized in about 200 different type of cells. As we can see here, the adult human body is composed of trillions of cells, which are generally differentiated in organs, but also inside the organs there is a different cell type. This is basically a map of cell within the human body. Generally, the cell theory is a cornerstone of biology. The cell theory states that biological organisms are composed of cells, and cells are the unit of life, and all life come from pre-existing life. Okay, so also the cell theory is one of the unifying principle of biology. Again, so the cell are the unit of life, and all organisms living today are a descendant of an ancestral cell, means an old cell. You can also find more information via using this link, and also having a look of this map when we can easily see the different type of cells that are present in our body, which once together they form a different kind of organs. Also, the cell theory, as a cell grow, its volume increase much more rapidly than its surface area. However, since the surface of cell is what allows the entry of oxygen, large cell cannot get as much oxygen as they would need to support themselves. Here in the figure we can see what does it mean to have a 1 centimeter cell, what does it mean to have a 2 centimeter cell, or what does it mean to have a 3 centimeter cell. Basically, we can see that there is always an increase of the surface, there is always an increase of the volume, but actually there is this ratio that the surface divided the volume is even lower. Okay, and this is just a general scheme in order to understand how the cells basically grows. Here in the second picture we can have a look, for example, how a leaf, a plant look like. Here we can have the whole structure, but here are all the cells that are composing this kind of plant under the microscope. And here again the concept is the same, but in an animal is a snake. So, and all living organisms are made up of cells. The cells are basic unit of life. What can I see here, for example, is a cell that is attached to another cell, which is also attached to another cell, which is also attached to another cells. And all the cells arise from pre-existing cells. And we can have a look in this part for when we will discuss about DNA, and hereditary information is passed also from cell to cell. Okay, so from this slide, just have a look how, for example, a plant look like, how the vegetal cell look like, and also how an animal cell look like. The concept is the same. More cell together can form an organism, vegetal organism or animal organisms. And now, just again, another example about the cell theory. We can see a leaf seen under the microscope. The leaf is composed of millions of plant cells, as we can see here, for example, in green. Just remember the color is green because inside the vegetal cell there is the presence of so-called chlorophyll, is a pigment. And here, for example, the human skin seen under the microscope. The skin basically is composed of millions of animal cells. But basically, as you can see, the structure is more or less the same. We have one cell close to another cell, close to another cell, close to another cell. Okay? Presence of many different cells which they form an organ. And the same here. So presence of cell close to another cell, close to another cell, close to another cell. What about the cell size? Most cells, both animal and plant, range in size between 1 and 100 micrometers, and they're just visible only via the aid of a microscope, so only via using a microscope. What can we see here is a very important graph which show you which kind of microscope do we need in order to observe a determined kind of cell. and also the size relative on a logarithmic scale of all the chemical but also living matter. For example, we can start from the atom, that is the smaller part of the matter, is about 0.1 nanometer. After that, we can find this kind of so-called biomolecules, such as lipid or protein. They can be found in a range from 1 nanometer to 10 nanometer. And after that, we can already start with a first living organism that is a virus, like, for example, in this case, the flu virus, which is a range of around 100 nanometer. After that, we can find some organelles. So there are particular structures that can be found inside the cell, basically. Also, like, for example, the mitochondria is an organelle that can be found inside the animal cell, or even the bacteria. They have the same size, is around 100 micrometer. The relative size on a logarithmic scale increase when we talk about animal cell or plant cell. We can see that the size is more or less the same, even though can be different. For example, if we speak about the human eggs, on the frog eggs, that is about 1 nanometer. However, more cells together can form an organ, more or can form a tissue, more tissue together can form an organ, and we can have, for example, an egg or a chicken eggs or ostrich egg. There are bigger, and here, like 1 meter, is the adult female. Okay, this scheme is very important because we can easily identify what can we see just via, for example, using our eye, the naked eye, or for example, what we can see using a light microscope, that is a particular kind of microscope, or what can we see using an electronic microscope. Okay, as we can see, there are many kind of structure biomolecules that can only be appreciated by using the electronic microscope. There are also some kind of cells and bacteria that can be seen via using the light microscope, and there are however also living organisms or living cell like the human eggs or the frog eggs that can be seen just using naked eye. As I told you, so at 0.1 to 5 micrometer in diameter, prokaryotic cells are smaller than eukaryotic cell. It is very important because generally in cell biology, all the differences between living organisms are based in the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic, which have a diameter ranging from 10 to 100 micrometer. The small size of prokaryotics allow ions and organic molecules that enter them to quickly diffuse to other parts of cells. And again, you can find also more information using this link, this BioLibrary text. So thanks for your attention. The next part of the presentation is about the physiological properties and structure of cell. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I wish you all the best for your course. Bye!